Hey there, welcome to the Soil and Roots podcast, digging beneath the surface to uncover the hidden ideas that form us, the church, and the culture. I'm Brian Fisher. This is episode 14, Unbreak My Heart. Welcome to season 2. I'm so glad you've come along on this journey of spiritual formation with me and the team here at Soil and Roots. Today we're turning a corner in our exploration of New Testament discipleship. We're going to leave the introductory nature of Season 1 and dig more into how to uncover the unconscious ideas in the human heart. Throughout the first season, we discovered some key things about our hearts and the modern church and culture. We're suffering from what Dallas Willard called the Great Omission. Though we hear about the importance of making disciples, we struggle to actually make them. We see the evidence of the lack of discipleship all over culture, though at an individual level, we tend to feel it if we quiet ourselves enough. It's a sense of disconnection from God and others and even ourselves. We wonder if there's more to the Christian life than what we're experiencing. The promises and the perspectives of the Bible, and particularly the New Testament, don't really seem to characterize our lives. We've looked at this from a few different directions. We looked at one model suggesting there are 6 stages in our journey of discipleship, though most of us generally only experience the first 3. We are made aware of God, and we embrace Him and learn more about Him and Christianity, and we begin to lead productive Christian lives of service. However, we have little context or opportunity to experience the later stages, the journey inward and the wall, the journey outward, and a life of love. In some ways, this season 2 we'll begin to explore the 4th stage of discipleship, the journey inward. How do we begin to get a sense of what's really going on in our hearts, in our stories? Last season, we explored the fact that there is a layer to the human heart that sits beneath our conscious minds. There are various ways to describe this bedrock of our hearts, but we've explored it as the realm of ideas that govern us, the often hidden assumptions and principles and conclusions that power who we are. If we want to become more like Jesus, we should recognize that Jesus seemed to operate quite frequently at that level. He was constantly probing and discerning the hearts of those around him. So discipleship is when we apprentice with Jesus for the purpose of becoming more like him. And we become more like him as the ideas of darkness in our hearts are formed more and more into ideas of light. However, we're born into an era that faces 3 primary problems. We have forgotten the kingdom. It's Jesus' primary message. We face a discipleship dilemma, and many of us live in a formation gap. We don't have access to communities that are specifically designed to form our character. So, Season 1, which we just finished, is an introduction to discipleship. Season 3 will be all about the formation gap, and Season 4 will focus on the forgotten kingdom. And this season, Season 2, is all about the discipleship dilemma. To become more like Jesus, we grow to learn his heart, and we also need to grow to learn our own hearts. However, exploring the hidden ideas in our hearts and how they were formed and the relationships and the experiences in our past that form them is not normally a part of the modern Christian ecosystem. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of ideas that form our hearts, and we've only touched on a few of them. It takes a while to learn to recognize ideas in our hearts or the hearts of others in the culture, but it's an adventure worth taking. We've explored an idea of the gospel. We looked at a few ideas of anthropology, what it means to be human, an idea of expectation, and some ideas of identity and value and purpose. I frequently have conversations with people who love Jesus and place a high value on the Bible, their church, Christianity. Sometimes, though, the person will confess that the so-called voices in their heads don't always match their stated beliefs. They know that Jesus loves them, they know they are a child of God, yet their thought patterns often reveal voices of condemnation or worthlessness, or perhaps arrogance or some sort of terrible insecurity. We know we shouldn't be anxious, but we're anxious anyway. We know we're supposed to forgive, though we struggle with anger and even rage, even towards people no longer in our lives. This is the sort of disconnection I'm talking about. Our hearts often embrace ideas that don't align with our beliefs. So this season we're going to explore and practice a spiritual habit I introduced last season called Heartview. It's a made-up word, though the habit itself is certainly not made up. It's simply taking what the Bible shares with us about how we discern our hearts and the hearts of those around us so that we can grow to become more like Jesus. God has wired human beings with 8 heart indicators. These indicators are our thoughts, our thought patterns, emotions, our health, actions, relationships, words, and how we use time and money. This season will consist of 12 episodes, and we're going to take a look at each indicator as we move through the season. And we're going to discover that if we're patient and curious, we can cooperate with God and a trusted friend to explore these 8 indicators. And then we can begin to get a pretty good grasp of the ideas and the desires that are sitting down in our hearts. But before we dig in, let me just give you one word of encouragement. The Soil and Roots podcast is a primary outreach of Soil and Roots, the organization. Our team is committed to helping cultivate deep discipleship in small communities, and we call those communities greenhouses. Greenhouses explore how to become more like Jesus through some rhythms and intentional dialogue that have been around for centuries. We've been doing this long enough to know that the Discipleship Dilemma tends to get the least amount of attention. Exploring the great omission and dark and light ideas, that's all pretty fun. Digging into the formation gap and the forgotten kingdom, that generates some amazing discussion in cultural studies. But for some reason, we tend to gloss over the discipleship dilemma. When it comes to exploring our own hearts, our own thought patterns, our relationships, our budgets, our emotional reactions, it can get a little difficult, and some of us are just tempted to avoid it. So here's my encouragement. Season 2 gets pretty practical, and that's good. So let's dig into it. Don't rush through it. These 8 indicators are powerful and helpful, but won't be of much use to our spiritual journeys if we don't take them seriously. We have plenty of space and time in the Soil and Roots journey to explore big ideas and trends in culture and church and the grand narrative of the Bible. Season 2 is not really about those things. It's about how our hearts reveal their desires and ideas in the everyday, mundane aspects of life. But if you begin to practice Heartview with a friend, I can pretty much promise you, you'll experience a leap forward in your spiritual journey. It's not easy, but it is worth it. All right, so let's dig a little deeper into this concept of Heartview. You might have guessed it, but I do like to read. It's my favorite hobby. I'm an introvert, and our boys are now young adults, so a great day for me is lots of quiet time with my books. And I frequently read in one of my favorite spots. I have a special reading chair, and my chair actually has a name. His name is Big Chief. Big Chief and I spend a lot of time together. On any given day, Big Chief is surrounded by a pile of books that I'm working through. But if my wife were to take a video of me reading in Big Chief and share it with you, you would probably think I'm a few fries short of a Happy Meal. As you might imagine, Big Chief is a big chair. It's actually more of a round love seat. It's got a huge cushion, but that means getting in and out of Big Chief is a bit of an ordeal. You can't just stand up, you have to sort of shimmy your way off of the cushion. So when you sit in it, you want to stay there for a while. But I'm a high-maintenance reader. I need 5 things when I read. I need the books, my water bottle, a Post-it notepad, a pen, and a highlighter. When I read, I mean business, and I take notes. I highlight passages, I mark things to come back to later, I reread certain paragraphs and bookmark certain pages. It's a pretty involved process. But here's the problem. I get so excited to read that most days I don't land in Big Chief with all 5 things. Half the time I forget my water bottle, so I have to get up and go find it. Then I'll sit back down and realize I have my pen, but I don't have my highlighter. So then I have to get back up and find the highlighter. Many times my Post-it notes fall down behind Big Chief's cushions, so then I need to get up and pull off the cushions and find my Post-it notes. Most days it takes me 3 to 4 up and down cycles to actually get settled into Big Chief so I can just start reading. This happens all the time. I look like a dog circling his spot to claim his territory. It's exhausting. When I finally do get settled into Big Chief, I read almost nothing but nonfiction. And most books deal with theology and worldview, cultural studies, anthropology. But over the past few years, I've studied quite a few books from authors who focus on education, counseling, therapy, trauma. And these 2 big camps don't always get along. Some theologians look down their noses at Christian counselors. Doctrine is the solution for all ills, so someone dealing with a difficult emotional problem just needs to read more of their Bible, or pray more, or memorize a few passages of Scripture. I once heard a pastor give a sermon on depression. He did a great job describing what depression is and how it impacts Christians, but his solution to getting out of depression was simply more Jesus. I'm not sure what he meant by that, and I don't think he did either. And sometimes professional counselors view theologians and academicians as unsympathetic, dogmatic, out of touch. A therapist concerned with wounded hearts is naturally inclined to a person's story. They're highly empathetic. They voluntarily enter the brokenness of their clients. It's not to say they don't care about theology, but a counselor may prioritize relationship and presence more than doctrine. So when it comes to understanding spiritual and heart formation today, I think the edge probably goes to the counselor, or the therapist, or maybe somebody like an attuned educator. As we've discussed, most Christian leaders today are primarily teachers, and we need that teaching, but they're not typically fellow travelers. Their role is to instruct, not to engage. Your pastor probably doesn't do life with you, but an empathetic friend or a counselor would do just that. Empathy, compassion, being surrounded by allies, trusted friends who have our backs, these are the qualities we embrace when we tackle Heartview. We'll be exploring the biblical basis for these indicators. We also need to explore our own stories, our own struggles and hurts and harms as we uncover our hidden ideas and desires with kindness and curiosity. Here's another way to think about it. We've noted there are two major groups of ideas in the soil and ideas in the air. So let's talk about these for a moment. God's two books, the Bible and creation, promote and proclaim ideas of light. These ideas lead to human flourishing. Though both books also teach us about ideas of darkness. God is gracious enough to not only invite us to embrace his life-giving good ideas, but he doesn't leave us ignorant about ideas that kill us. So the Bible is filled with examples of ideas of darkness, and nature also teaches us about ideas of darkness. These two books invite us to ideas of light, but educate us about ideas of darkness for our own good. Now, the seven mountains of culture work a bit differently. Culture is an amalgamation of ideas of light and dark, and culture may promote and proclaim all sorts of ideas at any given time. Some cultures tend towards ideas of light, and some cultures tend towards ideas of darkness. At the moment, modern culture seems to favor certain ideas of darkness, particularly dark core ideas of identity, anthropology, value, power, purpose, and love. So ideas in the cosmos and in the culture are what we call ideas in the air. It's basically the universe of all available ideas. Some of these ideas seep into our hearts, into our soils, over time. We embrace them, and we call these ideas in the soil. Okay, so culture today tends to be the primary driver of ideas in the air, not necessarily creation and the Bible. The reason is that many people don't pay much attention to either of God's books. But what is the primary driver of ideas in our soils? Well, it's our individual stories. Remember, we talked about the fact that our family of origin and early experiences are, by far, the most formative catalysts of our core ideas, things like identity, anthropology, power, purpose. When we begin to practice Heartview, we begin to see our stories show up in our thoughts, our emotions, our health, our behaviors, our relationships, our words, and how we use time and money. This is why Heartview takes kindness and courage. For example, when we begin to explore why we think the way we think, this can't be done only by looking at cultural influences or even genetics. Our thought patterns are highly influenced by our stories, particularly in our earliest years. This is also why we need to be careful not to confuse Heartview with worldview. Christian worldview rightfully claims that there is objective reality, and it's found in the ideas of the kingdom of light. It educates Christians to defend those realities against attacks from the kingdom of darkness, generally in the seven mountains of culture. Worldview training is amazing. It's indispensable. However, there's a layer underneath worldview that is also worth exploring. That's what we call Heartview. Why? Well, because oftentimes our hearts don't actually embrace the worldviews we espouse. Our hearts don't necessarily embrace what our minds think we believe. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, you might know the name Ravi Zacharias. If you don't know that name, just Google him, but don't Google him for too long. He was widely considered one of the foremost, most brilliant Christian apologists of the last 50 years. He taught a cogent, cohesive, biblically accurate Christian worldview. Yet towards the end of his life and afterwards, it became uncomfortably clear his heart had embraced ideas of darkness that were in direct contradiction to the worldview he taught. His heart was not in sync with his head. He had actually been engaging in a damaging and destructive lifestyle that betrayed the things that he taught. Our tendency is to look at that one example and try to claim it's an isolated instance, but it isn't. I could list off a dozen other Christian leaders, all of whom promoted a Christian set of beliefs or worldview, who have now either left the faith or disqualified themselves from ministry due to some sin. Every one of us has ideas in our hearts that contradict ideas of light, and every one of us has ideas that betray our Christian worldview. Each one of us is somewhat fragmented. There's a disconnect between our hearts and our heads. The surface answer as to why this disconnect exists is sin. Well, of course, that's the reason, though we normally stop our exploration with that surface answer. We sin when our hearts desire the ideas of the kingdom of darkness. We obey when our hearts desire the ideas of the kingdom of light. Heartview allows us the amazing opportunity to dig into our hearts to understand why we desire the things we do. A person who wants to grow to become more like Jesus must have a Christian worldview, but we also must practice Heartview so that we uncover the mysteries of why our hearts often desire the ideas that we actually don't espouse. Let's listen carefully to A.W. Tozer. He said, quote, that our idea of God corresponds as nearly as possible to the true being of God is of immense importance to us. Compared with our actual thoughts about Him, our creedal statements are of little consequence. Our real idea of God may lie buried under the rubbish of conventional religious notions and may require an intelligent and vigorous search before it is finally unearthed and exposed for what it is. Only after an ordeal of painful self-probing are we likely to discover what we actually believe about God. End quote. In other words, there's often a big difference between our stated beliefs and the ideas and desires in our hearts. And many of us don't even know that difference exists. We just do life. Heartview is a hard, often uncomfortable process, and that's why most of us don't do it. It requires kindness and courage, sometimes humility, sometimes the release of shame, or going back to places in our story where, frankly, we'd rather not visit. Most of us go about life without questioning or evaluating why we do what we do. We just do it. If we do engage in Heartview, it's typically because of some major crisis that forces us out of complacency and causes us to question our thought patterns, our emotions, our health, our behaviors, our relationships, our words, and how we use time and money. A divorce, a relationship breakup, a job loss, a health condition, a death. As we'll begin to explore next episode, Heartview is difficult, but it isn't rocket science. It's basically taking the time to pause and think about why we show the indicators we do. Why do I think the way I do? What's driving these feelings? Why did I just act the way I did? What do my spending habits tell me about my true desires? When we answer these types of questions with God and trusted friends, we then determine whether the ideas that drive our indicators are from the kingdom of darkness or the kingdom of light. Here is where instruction and worldview are so important. We need to know the difference between the two. When we identify ideas of darkness on our hearts, well, what do we do then? How do we cooperate with God and others to progressively transform darkness into light? In other words, how do we grow to desire the things of God rather than the things of darkness? Well, here's a very simple 3-step practice of Heartview. Step 1, we uncover. We evaluate our indicators to uncover the hidden ideas in our hearts. Step 2, determine. Are the ideas light or are they dark? Step 3, immerse. We immerse ourselves in cultures intentionally designed to transform dark ideas into light. Uncover, determine, immerse. This last step is what Christian counselors and therapists and mature educators do every day. And by the way, it's the foundation of addiction recovery programs such as AA or Celebrate Recovery. These folks understand the role that time, habit, intimacy, community, and instruction play in the healing and restoration of human hearts. Our hearts become unbroken through experiencing a culture of healthy spiritual formation. Remember, we are creatures of desire. Both kingdoms know that, and both kingdoms want our hearts. The kingdom of light wants our love because it's good for us. When we desire the kingdom of light and its king, we find beauty, we find justice, we find purpose, community, we find love, we find life, we flourish. When we desire the kingdom of darkness and its powers, we find ego, narcissism, cruelty, confusion, chaos, we find death, we die. Both kingdoms are passionately pursuing our hearts because both know that's the root of who we are. There's a good chance this is all pretty new to you. We're using different terms and some made-up words to describe discipleship and growth, and we're looking at Christianity in ways that aren't all that familiar to us. So just hang in there with me. As we go deep into Heartview this season, you're going to begin to see just how wonderful it is and how, as we grow to be formed into the likeness of Jesus, He transforms not only our hearts, but often the hearts of those around us. Hey, thanks for listening. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. The Soil and Roots community is growing because of you. If you'd like to join our email list or donate to the cause or find some more information on greenhouses, check out the website at soilandroots.org or touch base with us at fish@soilandroots.org. And we'll see you next time.